planning can save you a lot of issues along the way. Doesn't have to be anything vastly elaborate, but the more planning you do, the better. Site selection is very critical, especially here in Eastern Kentucky. If we were in Western Kentucky, where everybody had 40 acres of flat ground, it'd be a little bit different. You'd have more options for rotation of your crops and everything else. You'd be less likely to be worried about your garden plots getting flooded or anything else. Here in Eastern Kentucky, we're blessed with having the mountains, but we're also somewhat inhibited with flat ground unless you're on a bottom somewhere. And if you are on a bottom, then you have to worry about flooding, just like we had here a couple of weeks ago when the river came up with all the rain we had and things, ended up clogging up the intake pipe for the City of Jackson water intake, and that got the banks cleared off of all the trash that's accumulated since the leaves come down. But you need to think about where you're going to put it. You don't want it in a site that's going to flood. You do want good drainage. If you have a site that doesn't drain well, I would encourage you to go ahead and start thinking about what you can do to improve drainage on that site. Laying drainage tile probably isn't practical for most people, but certainly working in cover crops to help build up your soils so that they have better structure. When we talk about soils, we talk about both soil texture and soil structure. Texture is the ratio of sand, silt, and clay in your soil. That's a physical property. And the structure of the soil is how those soil particles adhere to each other and how they clump together. It's a function of the soil texture, but it's also a function of the soil organic matter as well. If you have more organic matter in your soil, those soil particles are going to form clods or peds, we call them, that have larger macropores that allow better drainage of water. If you have just a heavy clay soil and it rains, it's not going to drain well. Alternatively, if you have one of these bottoms that gets a lot of deposition of silt and sand when the river comes up, it's probably going to drain very well. In either case, the addition of organic matter, either through working in compost or peat or leaf mold or just cover crops, are certainly a good way to do it, though it takes a little bit longer to do that. Anything you can do to improve your soils is really going to benefit you in the long run. I like to see soils that have at least 3% organic matter. 5% would be great. I'd be happy if I see 3%. I have yet to see too many soils or any soils in Kentucky that have too much organic matter. You also want to be thinking about irrigation. If you're thinking about putting in a market garden plot, that's going to be critical to the success of your market garden. If you're putting in just a small home garden, so you can have some fresh tomatoes and lettuce, some herbs and things for your own kitchen garden, something right outside your kitchen door, you can easily water that with a garden hose or a gallon of water that you draw out of the tap and pour on your plants. But if you're going to be doing any garden of any substantial size, you want to think about irrigation. I've been here in Eastern Kentucky now going on 11 years next month. And I could count on two hands the number of times that I really needed to irrigate any of our plots here at the research station in those 11 years. And there have been some years where we haven't had to irrigate at all. But in those years when you need the irrigation, if you're doing a market garden or something like that, or if you have perennial crops, that can make the difference between success and failure. So think about it. Or if you're putting out new plants and things, irrigation is critical. Thankfully, here in Eastern Kentucky, we typically aren't lacking for moisture in the springtime when people are putting their gardens out. I don't want people to just be thinking about spring gardens, though this is what we're really talking about now, but we really can get away with 3 seasons of gardening very well here in Eastern Kentucky. Spring gardens with your early season cool crops summer gardens when you've got your tomatoes, your beans, your cucumbers, and then a fall garden as well. And I've actually had better success with my cold crops, my cabbages, my broccoli, kale, with fall crops than I have in spring. In the spring, sometimes, as much as we're looking forward to things warming up, those cool season crops, they can just get started growing well, and then we can get a sudden burst and jump right into summer, and that can really hurt our spring crops, our cool season crops. Whereas in the summertime, late summer, if you put out your broccoli transplants, your cabbage transplants, they like those warm soils to start growing well. But then when they mature late in the fall, you typically have less problems with insects. The plants are maturing in the cool weather, so they're sweeter, they mature more slowly, taste better as well. So just something to think about. Sunlight, just about anywhere you go, you need minimum of 6 hours of direct sun, preferably 8 hours of direct sun. I know that can be hard to get in some of these hollers and things, but if you are limited on the amount of sunlight, you might want to be thinking about doing container gardening. You can grow things in 5-gallon buckets. I've talked with several growers here that their whole tomato production is done in 5-gallon buckets. They just kind of, it's a lot of work, but they move them around. They're not doing 200 buckets, but you know, if they can do 5 or 6 buckets and move them around if they need to get them that 8 hours of direct sunlight. It's not the easiest way to do it, but certainly herbs and things like that you can grow in containers and get the sunlight you need. Move them around from one side of the house to the other, try and get them as much sunlight as you can. Also, you want to avoid frost pockets, those low-lying areas where cold air will settle. Remember that cold air is heavier than warm air. That's why traditionally the orchards in eastern Kentucky are on the ridge tops, because in the springtime, as the frosts are coming in, that cold air will drain off of the ridges and settle down in the valleys, and the ridge tops will be warmer, protecting the fruit trees from a late freeze or anything like that. If you're near a large body of water, if you're near the North Fork or Middle Fork of the Kentucky River, that will provide some protection as well, because those large bodies of water will certainly help to provide some frost protection as well. But trying to avoid the low-lying areas if at all possible. So site selection is critical. One other thing, I didn't throw it on the slide here, but I do see quite a bit of black walnut and oaks grown in eastern Kentucky. Black walnuts particularly are notorious for releasing compounds from their roots that will inhibit the growth of other plants and things. So avoid anywhere where you've got black walnuts growing. Oaks also, the tannins and that will leach out of the oak leaves can be kind of hard on your soils and things. So if you're going to put down mulch in that, a well-rotted organic mulch is ideal. If you put down a fresh mulch, try and avoid oaks and things, because those tannins will leach out and can impact the growth of your plants as well. Crop selection is important. I'll talk a little bit about that more when we talk about some of the production guides that are available. But you know what you like to grow. You kind of have a good feeling for how much you want to grow. We do have some guides. There's some guides online. You know, that's kind of up to you. If you do have something that you really like, we do have, and I'll show you some links to some of our variety selections and things. But if you have something that you really like and it's not listed in one of our recommended production guides, just let your agent know, let me know, and we'll try and include it. We're behind, I'll admit that right now, on our variety testing. Typically, most of our variety testing is done looking at commercial varieties rather than varieties for the home gardener. We rely a lot on our master gardener volunteers, market gardeners, anybody else that can make good suggestions to us for good varieties that are good for home gardeners. Your commercial varieties, taste is not one of the first things that breeders look at when they're selecting their plants for release to the market. They're looking for yield, shipping characteristics, and disease resistance. Those three characteristics are the first thing that breeders look at. Taste is low on the list of things that they're looking for. So if you called me up and asked me for a variety recommendation, I'd first want to find out if it was something for personal use or for market gardening for more of our commercial scale. So again, just say, if you got something you really like and it does well and you don't see it in our recommendations, let us know and we'll try and look at it and pass on the good words to other people. You also need to be thinking about your cultural methods. What production method are you going to use? Are you going to use conventional production methods, looking at some of our harder chemistries? Are you going to lean towards more natural chemistry? Do you want to get certified organic? I'll work with any grower. I know our agents will work with growers no matter what production system they want to use, but that can really impact the recommendations that we make, different suggestions, different recommendations we have. I'm not opposed to organic production at all. There's definitely a market for some people to be doing that, particularly if you were near Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green, the larger cities. Pikeville has a pretty good market for organic produce over there that way as well. But for beginning gardeners, for most of our gardeners, Eastern Kentucky is ideal climate for diseases. You know that. One of the reasons this horticulture station exists here is because we're a hotbed for disease. I'm usually one of the first locations in the state that gets downy mildew, and our plant pathologists love to do research over this way because we can pretty much guarantee that we're going to get disease over here. And most of you across the area here, the quicksand area that we're targeting, are also in areas that the humidity levels are high. If you just think to May morning, you wake up and the fog is sitting in the holler and it sits there until 10 o'clock in the morning. Those are ideal conditions for disease infection and things. So if you do want to do organic, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's going to be more of a challenge. And I'll just throw this out here for any of our new growers. I know our seasoned growers are aware of this, but organic doesn't mean no spray. Often you actually have to spray more using organic pesticides than you do with some of our conventional pesticides because some of our organic pesticides don't have the residuals that some of our conventional pesticides do. So just kind of keep that in mind. Rotation is critical. Any of our pathologists, our entomologists would agree with me if they were doing this talk as well. And I'm not saying that you have to have an elaborate map drawn out on your computers of where in your garden you're planting everything, but just try and keep in mind where you've got your plants in one family. Your solanaceous crops, things like tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, those are all in the solanaceous family. They're going to get a lot of the same diseases and be attractive to the same type of pests. So you don't want to follow up plants in one plant family with plants in the same plant family. That helps to break that disease pest cycle. So I know, as I mentioned earlier, we aren't blessed with a lot of flat ground for rotational purposes, but certainly rotation is important, especially for our market gardeners. Here with our pumpkin days that we do for the kids and that, we always try and shoot for at least 2 years between going to the same field for our cucurbits, our pumpkins, squashes, and melons, because those soil-borne diseases that are present in the soil, those fungi and bacteria that are there, will reinfect again. So if you can rotate your crops around in your fields and things, that will help. None of us are getting any younger. If you are getting younger, please tell me how you're doing that. But I know I don't like to rely on my memory anymore. And it's just a simple spiral notebook or something like that that you keep with your seed catalog. Say, in this year I had tomatoes in the northwest corner. Next year I'm going to move them to the southwest corner. You can get that as elaborate as you want, but that's certainly going to help to break up any disease problems. If you're growing in containers, You can certainly sterilize your soils, your potting mix if you want to. It's often easy enough to just go back and purchase a fresh bale of Pro Mix and put in your containers every year. I'll throw this in here as well. I always like to encourage people, if you are going to be purchasing Pro Mix or Metro Mix, any of those bales of commercial soilless mixes, make sure that you're getting the fresh ones. I don't like to purchase anything that's older than 6 months because they do start to break down in those bales if they've been sitting at the distribution site for longer than 6 months. We've actually had problems where we've had failures before with seed germination, just because as they sit in the sun and bake, there's chemical reactions, physical reactions that go on in those bales and things that can really hurt you. So, you know, invest a little extra money at the front end and it'll save you in the long end. Sanitation, again, it's kind of tied in with rotation, but that's critical. That's something that you can be doing now, cleaning up your perennial beds, going in, raking off the dead leaves, any pruning that needs to be happening. Make sure that your pruners are sharp. If you do think you have disease, mention this right now. I was talking with Reed earlier. He's collecting some scion wood and things. You know, if you think that you've got fire blight in your apples and things, it doesn't hurt to just, we've all gotten used to walking around with sanitary sand wipes, alcohol wipes to wipe off our hands and things. So just carry that with you, wipe off your pruners as you go from plant to plant. Start with your clean materials first and work towards your diseased material, but clean off your tools, you know, your pruners, your shovels and all that as you're going around. Just saves spreading disease around. Dr. Gauthier, Dr. Pfeiffer, our pathologists, were always emphasizing the importance of sanitation. And that goes with your compost piles as well. Don't throw diseased materials in your compost pile unless you can guarantee that it's going to get up to a temperature high enough to kill those disease-causing organisms. And I will say that most compost piles that I've seen are nothing more than a trash heap. They're not a true compost pile that heats up warm enough to kill disease-causing organisms. I will also just throw this out there for anybody in Breathitt County. I saw a notice coming around that the Breathitt Soil and Water Conservation District is going to have information about rain barrels and composting units coming up. I've got a little link on that on my Facebook page talking about that. Don't know any more than a notice that something is going to be happening. So just keep your eyes out for that. Now is a good time, not this week specifically with the ice storm that's coming in, but after the storm gets through us, I hope you've noticed that the days are getting warmer and sunnier. Solarization is a good way to help sanitize some of your planting beds. You just simply take a nice sheet of clear plastic and lay it down over your garden bed. You don't want to lay it tight like you would black plastic on the soil. You want a little bit loose so that the temperature can build up in that airspace underneath there. The heat is transferred not through direct conduction, but through radiation through the clear plastic, like in a greenhouse. And then under that clear plastic, that soil will warm up. You'll get a big flush of weeds. Then you can pull that clear plastic off and kill off those weed seeds in your soil. It also helps to kill back some of the insects to some extent, and some of the diseases in your soil as well. So solarization is something that you can be thinking about right now as well. This is a website that is on our Hort Department web page. That web address is there. This is specifically for home vegetable gardeners. Different fact sheets on there. It's not everything that's out there by any means. I certainly encourage people to go to our Center for Crop Diversification for our commercial growers. We have enterprise budgets and everything there. The Department of Plant Pathology has websites like this as well. We've tried to put things in here. We do have some information on organic gardening, diseases, cultivars at ID 133, about halfway down the page under cultivars. That's where we try and update that. I think that's probably been 5 to 7 years probably since we've updated that. So that definitely needs updating as well. So encourage people to check out that website. Lots of good information on there. Soil testing is critical. Now is a good time to get your, again, not this week with the ice storm coming in, but next week, soil testing is critical. If you don't know how to do a soil test, there is a link there that will show you how to do that. The key point to keep in mind with this is you want a clean plastic bucket. Don't use a galvanized bucket or a rubber bucket, though I haven't seen too many rubber buckets anymore, but no galvanized buckets, because if you do that, your zinc levels will come back excessive in your soil test. And that's just from the galvanization in the bucket. So nice clean bucket. There's a couple of different links there that can show you how to do that. Talk to your county agent. Your agent can get that sent in. I did talk with Diane at the soils testing lab last week, and they're running behind right now, which typically they aren't in the spring too much, but 2 of their carbon nitrogen analyzers, they're both down. They have 2 and they're both down, waiting on repair that should have gotten repaired late last week or this week. They're hoping, if they didn't get repaired late last week, they were hoping they'd get fixed this week. So get your soil samples in before everybody else starts getting theirs in, and you'll have information on whether you need to get some lime down and what fertilization needs to get done. Just talking about fertilization really briefly, betting dollars to donuts. There's not a single one out there that needs any phosphorus on your soils. Just about every soil test that I've seen in Kentucky has excess levels of phosphorus. So you can get by with avoiding using complete fertilizers that have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in there. And most of your soils will probably only need nitrogen and maybe some lime or sulfur, depending on what you're trying to grow. So I think I'll just take any questions right there, Heather, if there's anything before I get into these production guides.
We've had a couple come in. The first one, when you were talking about sanitizing and getting rid of anything that was diseased,
Yep.
is the best option to burn those items?
That's certainly an acceptable option. Depends what it's infested with. Burning, you know, we're always concerned with the whole air pollution and things like that. We would rather people compost it and work it into their soils. But again, most people, the secret to a compost pile to killing off those disease organisms is getting it hot enough. And if you're adding the right ratio of brown woody material to green high nitrogen material, it will heat up to anywhere 120, 140, 150 degrees, which won't sterilize the soil, but that will kill off the majority of the disease causing organisms. Otherwise, if you just leave it piled, if you can set it aside in a corner and let it sit for a couple of years, typically that warming, cooling, freezing over the winter, that'll kill off a lot of the stuff, and then you can work it into the soil as well. Or you could put it in a garbage bag, a black plastic garbage bag, set that in the sun. That will certainly heat up. Leave it sitting in there in the summer and it'll get kind of ripe and stink a lot. But that's just another way that you can kind of sterilize it. Depends how much you've got. You know, with my asparagus plot, I chop it off in the fall to cut down on the asparagus beetles, but then I'll go through and I'll actually burn off that short little stubble in the asparagus patch in the spring, just to kill off any further asparagus beetles that are in there and just kind of clean it up. So just make sure that you're aware of your burn restrictions before you start a fire. We don't want to start a wildfire, just cleaning up your garden and things.
Thank you. And the other question, and you may be addressing this later, so if you are, that's fine. When is the best time to plow your garden and get it prepared? Is it good to go ahead and turn it over and let a couple good frosts get those weed roots?
Ideally, the best time to work your garden is in the fall after you've harvested your crops. I know it's hard for people to do that because it's getting late. People are usually sick of gardening and things. The reason that I like to see people do that in the fall is because that brings up things, depending on whether you're doing deep tillage or just some rototilling, some shallow tillage. It brings seeds, weed seeds to the surface. Particularly if you have perennial weeds like Johnson grass or something, bringing those rhizomes to the surface will help freeze them and kill them off. Also, you need to keep in mind that you really don't want to work your soils when they're wet, because that will compact those soil beds into tight things. And it's kind of like, if you walk on wet soil, you can see where you've walked and it just compacts the soil. So you really don't want to work your soils when they're wet, but after a couple of snows and our rains in the spring, people are itching to get out on there, and then they tend to work their soils where they're wet. Whereas if you do it in the fall, even if you just turn up a shallow bed, let it sit, and then in the springtime here, now through that freeze thaw, it'll start.
Are you still with us, Dr. Wright?
But if you're going to do it then. Or if you do go ahead and put on a cover crop in the fall, you need to get it turned so that it has time to decompose before you plant. So you do need to get it on there. For most gardeners now, I wouldn't, I know there's somebody's going to go out on Sunday on Valentine's Day and plant peas just to say they planted their peas on Valentine's Day. But the research that Dr. Coulong did here shows that you can plant your peas on St. Patrick's Day and get just as good a production out of them as if you went ahead and planted them on Valentine's Day. So I know I'm just like everybody else. I want to get out and get my fingers dirty, but you can do just as much damage to your soil and hurt yourself in the long run working it when it's wet versus working it when it's drier and drained off.
I hate to ask this, and it might have just been my computer, but you froze part of the way through your answer. So we got you up to, you were talking about not doing it so much in the spring when we've had the snows and the rains and the compaction of the soil. And
Okay.
at that point is when it froze, or at least on my end.
Okay, fall, I'll keep it short this time. Fall is better because then it has time to freeze and thaw over the winter, kill off the weed seeds. And also then you're not working the soil as much in the spring when it's wet, because it will drain quicker and it'll warm up quicker in the springtime if you turn it in the fall.
Okay. What was the tidbit on if you do put the cover crop on?
If you put the cover crop on, you need to get it turned soon so that it has time to decompose before you plant your spring crops.
Think you may have frozen again. Is it just on my end? Can somebody else chime in and tell me if they're getting freezing?
No, I can't hear him either, Heather.
Yeah, it's freezing on my end too.
Okay. All right. Are you back with us, Dr. Wright?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me see here. I had a couple of tabs open to show you some websites. Usually we have a pretty good connection here. Let me go ahead and close out a couple of tabs that I have open and see if that helps any. I'm not sure if that will help or not. But I'm the only one in the building tonight, so we should be okay with the bandwidth. I'm not sure what the issue is. How are we doing now?
You're good.
Heather, Right, I hear him.
Okay, let me go on then, and we can just kind of hit things as we go back and try and cover what people are missing. The ID 36 is the Commercial Vegetable Production Guide. There's a link there to that for a PDF, or your county agents will have that. Really geared for the market gardeners and the commercial gardeners. The pesticide recommendations in there don't apply to most home gardeners, but there's some production information in there that, if you want to look it up on your computers and check it out, you might find that useful. It is broken out as shown here with some general production considerations, an insect, weed, and disease management section. Then broken down into individual vegetables. And I really encourage people to look at the tables in the back there. There's good information there. People always tend to look just at the specific vegetable that they're interested in and skip over the stuff in the front of the book and the back of the book that can really help you out as well. Conversions are in the back. Just had somebody, we were talking the other day, and they were asking me how many pints in a quart and things like that. So if you ever get stuck on that, information's in the back of the book. There is a little section for fumigants, but that wouldn't apply to most of you. There are tables for generic fungicides and insecticides in there. I always like to encourage people to use generics where appropriate, because it will save you some money. And then one thing that's, I think people really find interesting are home gardeners. I know I get calls on this. I'm sure our agents do as well. We have people that like to save seeds, and I encourage that, but they always are interested in trying to disinfect their seeds and things. You can do that in different ways. The most common way to do that, and the way that people always try and do that usually fails for them, is a hot water treatment. And the reason that it fails is because people just try and do it on the stove, but you really need a water bath that you can set the temperature on, and a good quality candy thermometer that's going to give you a precise temperature. Just eyeballing it on the stove or with a hot water kettle, and that, it's either not going to get hot enough to do much good, or it's going to get too hot and you kill your seed. So professionally, commercial growers, people that have the money to invest in a good quality hot water bath, you're looking at $100 or better for one of those. Sure, go ahead and do that. For the home gardener, probably doesn't make sense. But for home gardeners, one thing that people really like to save are tomato seeds. And you can do a chlorine bleach treatment, and that will help to control certain things that are present on the surface of the seed, the bacteria that cause bacterial spot, speck, and canker of tomato. That's right on the surface of the tomato seed, and a chlorine bleach treatment will help to some extent for that. It will also get you some control of tobacco mosaic virus. But if you know your tomato seeds have tobacco mosaic virus, then you really want to be looking at the trisodium phosphate, the TSP treatment, and that will actually help eradicate the tobacco mosaic virus. So this was really for the tomato growers. I know we have a lot of people that like to save tomato seeds, and either think about the chlorine bleach treatment or the TSP treatment if you do have some tomato seed that might be potentially infected. People are going to be wondering about frost dates. Hopefully you know when your typical frost date is. These tables are in ID 36. Earliest planting dates, we have tables for that in there as well. One thing people would want to be thinking about now, even it's a little bit early, if you're going to be seeding onions, we're probably 13 weeks out, 12, 13 weeks out from our last frost date here in quicksand. So if we were going to be seeding lettuce or seeding onions, we'd be getting those going here in the next week or so. Just some things to think about there, when you can get them out and things like that. All that information is in ID 36. For the home gardeners, we have a different publication, ID 128, Home Vegetable Gardening. And again, there's a link to the PDF document that you can print that off or get a copy from your county agent. There's a section in the front, again, plans and preparations, choosing a site, organic gardening, is we've expanded that section a little bit now, preparing the soil, crop rotation, pest control, all those things that I've talked about are covered in there. There is a nice section in there on growing more with less space, intensive gardening, mini gardens. You know, as people are getting older, they don't want to work the half-acre garden anymore. You can do a lot with square foot gardening, and that works out well. I like to encourage people to think about that. One garden plot, 3 garden seasons, trying to get people thinking about the spring, summer, and fall gardens as well. Again, this section is broken down into disease, insect, weed control, how to store vegetables, and then there is a section in there as well with the specific vegetables where you can look up different things. I was hoping I could take you to that link, but I don't actually dare do that if we're having problems with our bandwidth or something here. But the thing to keep in mind, actually, maybe I have mine in my drawer. I should have mine in my drawer. And I don't have mine in my drawer. The way that is laid out is there's discussion under a specific vegetable is how to grow it, things to be concerned about, diseases. And then under insect control, you'll see a bunch of numbers following a specific insect. And if you look at the bottom of the page, those are all the insects, the different chemicals that will control those insects and things. So that's at the bottom of the page. But if you go ahead and look at that PDF document, or you could get a hard copy and look at that, your agents can walk you through how to use that as well. So that's a real good publication as well. Let me stop right here before I get into some chemical things. Any questions? Hopefully we're not still having freezing in that.
Dr. Wright, this is Paul Sizemore over at Owsley County.
Yep.
Do you have any kind of information on local sources for organic fertilizers and pesticides?
Unfortunately, I don't. It's tough to get, you know, local sources. We're hurting for local sources, not only for organic materials, but for conventional materials as well. I typically end up going over to Lincoln County, Casey County, and picking up supplies, or up to Lexington to pick up supplies as well. Our local Southern States dealer will not take a charge card from the university here, and we don't have a petty cash account for accounting purposes or anything. So if I need something, I typically have to make a run to Lexington or something myself, or down to Hazard to pick things up. So I wish we had good local sources. Hopefully, as more people get involved in organic production, and that we'll have that. Might be something that if the agents see a need, quicksand area agents, you might think about trying to do some sort of bulk cooperative purchase or something. You know, if there's enough interest, there can certainly form just a simple buyer's co-op. That's what our hop growers have done for purchasing coconut coir in the fall for hanging our hops and things. They form a co-op strictly for buying that, and that's the only thing they use it for. So just something to think about. But yes, supplies are limited, but so people have gotten so used to buying things online now with COVID and that. I think you can pretty much get what you need online. The shipping might be expensive, but you can get it.
Thank you.
Yep.
We've not had any other questions come through.
Then we'll kind of just hit chemical stuff here. The label is a legal document. The label is the law. don't ask your agent if you can apply something that's not labeled. They'll tell you no. I will tell you no as well. It's not that we are being mean or harsh. We're saving you from legal liability. So the label is a legal document. I can
We lost you again, Dr. Wright.
Okay, I just had something pop up that my internet connection is unstable.
You're back with us now and we can hear and see you.
Okay, well, I apologize. I just had something pop up that said my internet connection is unstable. I'm not sure why. So I'll try and hit this. I'll make this presentation available to your agents as well. So if you do want a copy of this, they'll have that available and can email it out to you as well. But chemicals, the label is a legal document. Again, rotate your chemicals, modes of action. Make sure that nothing is expired. If you're purchasing chemicals, make sure you know what you're getting. For years, the active ingredient in 7 was carbaryl. Back starting in 2018, the active ingredient in some formulations of 7 is now zeta-cypermethrin. It's similar to what our commercial growers use called Mustang Max. It's a pyrethroid. They both can be used for both 7 formulations. The cypermethrin and the carbaryl are used for garden insects. Home gardeners use it. This new formulation on the left is typically has a longer pre-harvest or a shorter pre-harvest interval, longer period of activity than carbaryl does. So just because you're going to buy some 7, you think it's active ingredient is what it always was, might not be. So again, I always encourage people to just read the label. I know they're incredibly boring reading, but even if you just check the active ingredients, make sure there hasn't been a change in the rates and things on the label. Don't go by your memory, just check, make sure everything is the same. It'll save you some either over application or under application in the long run. Pesticide license. If you do need one, your agents can work you through the process. Certified private applicator means a person certified to use any pesticide for purposes of producing any agricultural commodity on property owned or rented by him or his employer or the lands of a farmer neighbor without compensation other than trading of personal services. That's different than our commercial applicators license. Certified commercial applicators are doing it for hire. If you do get a commercial applicator's license, you're probably going to be category 1A, plant and animal production. Other things you need to think about is marketing. If you're going to be marketing your produce, just touch base with your markets ahead of time. Make sure you know what they want, when they want it, and how they want it packaged. Physical stuff that needs to be done, get yourself a good physical. Again, none of us are getting any younger. You might think you're healthy, but again, with COVID and everything going around, never hurts to just get a good physical in the spring. If you didn't have one before deer season, just get checked out, make sure you're good and healthy, and it'll pay off in the long run. And physical stuff to check with your equipment, check your hoses, belts, cotter pins, tires, make sure those are all in good condition. Sharpen your tools, buy good quality hoe. The $5 hoe from the big box stores aren't going to hold up. A good quality hoe you can sharpen with a file and should last you your lifetime and the lifetime of your children and grandchildren as well. Always like to put some boiled linseed oil on the wooden handles of our tools. Make sure you get your oil changes done. Check your row covers for holes. Make sure you've got those available, or blankets, whatever you're going to use to cover your plants for frost protection. If you're going to be using an irrigation pump, make sure that that's functioning. Like to see people put backflow valves on their faucets on their houses. Not that most of you are going to be using them for irrigation, but just in case you do want to fertigate or something, you need that backflow valve on there. They run $1 or $2 at Lowe's or something. Just screw on, and it just prevents water from siphoning back into your water supply. Again, getting fresh potting mix, get your pruning done, check your fences, make sure they're in good condition to keep the critters out. Check your mulch supply, whatever you're going to get for mulch, and make sure that that's available as well. I think I'll end it there since we seem to be having some trouble here, and go from there. Just about been on an hour as it is, but happy to try and answer some questions. I apologize for the connectivity problems. I'm not sure what that is. We'll have to get that checked out.
We've not had any more questions come through in chat, but if anybody has any, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them now or put them in the chat box.
I have a question.
Sure.
So do all the chemicals have an expiration date? Because I haven't gone and looked for the small print,
Yep.
but like I have turf builder and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there should be an expiration date on the label.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Most people are going to use up their chemicals in 1 or 2 growing seasons. That's, it's a balancing act between buying the ready to use things that you know you're going to use up in a season versus the cost benefit of buying a concentrate, but then you have the issues of storing them so they don't freeze and break down and things. But I always like to tell people, buy as much as you need so you're storing as little of it as possible to the next season.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions you all would like to ask of Dr. Wright?
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Again, if you have questions, contact your county agents. I'll make sure and get this out to them as well. One of you remind me to send you the PDF, and I'll get that out. And again, happy gardening.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. And before everybody signs off, just a few little housekeeping notes. If you haven't already, please make sure you put your county and how many people are watching in the chat box. Most of you all are within the quicksand area, so I'm sure you're probably aware, but if not, this time of year is when we put in our plant orders and our rootstock orders. So if you're interested in either of those things, be sure to reach out to your ag agent. For the rootstock, it's apple and pear rootstock. And then for the plants, there's strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, black raspberries, asparagus, and candy onions. Also wanted to let you all know what the upcoming schedule is for this Mountain Monday Zoom series. Next week, we have calving and calf health with Dr. Michelle Arnold. Then the following week, which is February 22nd, we've got farm management strategies for improved decision-making. In March, we have diagnosing problems in the home lawn, fruit tree grafting, and then produce best practice training, which a lot of farmers markets require before you can set up and sell. Then we'll have marketing at the farmers market and raised bed gardening. We'll start April with pond management. But if there's any topics that you all are interested in, please let your county agent know. This is a fluid process, so we can most certainly put that on the schedule for April or even the coming months if we're still having to do Zoom series instead of in person. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Patty Fugit with Perry County Soil Conservation. She wants to talk to you all about what they're offering for Perry County residents.
Good evening, everyone. If you are on here and you're from Perry County, As you know, most of the time, Dr. Wright usually comes to the Perry County Extension Office and does a workshop in person, but due to COVID, this is how we're doing it this year. But if you're from Perry County and you've attended this, in March, we will get with you on a date, not sure of that yet, but like we always do when we have our workshops, we'll be giving away corn seed, bean seed, and we will have mustard seed as well. It will be ambrosia corn, like always, because that's usually what everybody asks for. Blue Lake bush and state half runners. But other than that, that's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Fugit. And if anybody's got any questions, now's your time to ask, or we'll wrap it all up for the evening and let everybody go. And all right.
Let me say one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Knott County and Letcher County, they usually do seed giveaways as well. If you're on here and you're from one of those counties, you may want to check with your conservation district and see if they will be giving vegetable seeds away.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's got us for this evening. Be on the lookout for links for registration for the upcoming Mountain Monday series sessions. And with that, I wish you all a good evening and happy gardening. Bye, everybody.